Kevin Hunter and Darren Fredrickson here on Master Surveillant Mindset on Northwest Digital News. We're going to talk about the burglars coming. And Darren, there have been a few incidences of this around the United States. And being that both of us have roots in Minnesota, let's talk about what's going on in Minnesota, the Elk River area, which is northwest of Minneapolis, St. Paul. A lot of burglaries hitting residential areas there, and so far, no arrests. What's going on?
Yeah, so about a month ago, my family members, friends in Minnesota started hitting me up, and they said, hey, we got a burglary ring up here, and it blew up on Facebook, and because I follow all my families and friends in Minnesota, and so I started looking at it and pulling up articles and stories and all that, and sure enough, there's a group, and they call it a sophisticated group of burglars that are targeting like the Big Lake, Elk River, Plymouth, like the west part of western Minneapolis, St. Paul suburbs. Mm-hmm. And they call them sophisticated, and they're actually not really that sophisticated. They're just opportunists, and they're taking advantage of people not locking their doors. So in a nutshell, what this group is doing, and they have like 60 burglaries under their belt, and right. So far there's no arrests. And so it sounds like there's law enforcement all over all over the area that are focusing on this group and all that. But they're basically finding unlocked vehicles in driveways and using the remote control in the vehicle to unlock the garage. And then they basically steal items out of the garage. Mm-hmm. And then they're even venturing into the house. And this is occurring at night. They're venturing into the house while people are sleeping and stealing things, which that takes it to a whole new level, because most burglars want no confrontation. So they'll just limit themselves maybe to a vehicle or a garage, but they're actually venturing into the home, which can create a confrontation, which is not good for a homeowner. Mm-hmm. So that's just one group that's just been terrorizing the Minneapolis suburbs. And it doesn't sound like I've researched everything. It doesn't sound like they've made any arrests yet. They made arrests on a couple that were possibly related. Mm-hmm. But other than that, the only information they have is they believe it's a young group of juveniles, because apparently one of the credit cards stolen out of a vehicle was used at a retail store, and they have a photo. But as of yet, no arrest. And mm-hmm. So I just thought this would be a good opportunity to talk about what you can do to avoid this situation, because really your security and your safety comes down to you. The police are going to show up after something's going on, and they can't mm-hmm. patrol every single neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And burglars they're not stupid. And so when they case an area and they see vehicles, they wait for things to quiet down. And if they're doing it in the middle of the night, there's not much traffic anyways. And I spent years, almost 10 years, following burglars at night. We called them garage surfers at that time, where they would just circulate neighborhoods looking for open garages. Mm-hmm. This group's actually taken it to where they're looking for unlocked vehicles. And how many, honestly, if you can raise your hand, how many have a vehicle parked outside of your house with a garage door opener in your vehicle? Mm-hmm. Probably, I'm guessing a lot.
A lot.
So, a lot. And so there's groups that will break a window, unlock the remote control, get into the garage, but they're just looking for unlocked vehicles. So, simple solution: lock your vehicle, hide your remote control, and you can alleviate at least being targeted by this group here.
The remote control could go into the center armrest, or it could go in the glove box or wherever, but it does not have to be put out where somebody can easily see it, and then obviously give them incentive for breaking into the house. You know, sure. One of the things I want to talk about, you actually know this area well, as do I. Lived there for a while, and that northwest suburb area of the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul area, that northwest suburb, it's a pretty quiet community. There's a lot of rural space out there. Even the street that I lived on would be a classic area off the main road to go through and case these neighborhoods. And one thing that I wanted to share with people, because when they mentioned that these are burglars that are going into these unlocked houses, unlocked garages, unlocked cars, one of the other things that could potentially be happening, this was actually a few years ago. I was riding in a vehicle, in my vehicle, had a friend of mine with me, and he worked in electronics and that sort of thing. And he shared with me that there were so many thousands of codes in these garage transmitters that the likelihood of ever having a transmitter similar to your neighbor or anyone around you was pretty much slim and none. And we're driving down the road and in small town America. And I'm like, well, I'm curious now. So we start driving through town. And we weren't doing this for any malicious reasons. We weren't planning on breaking into anybody's houses. But I told him, I said, you start hitting the button when we're going by these houses and see, you know, they obviously have to have a garage door opener and they'd have to have the same code as me. Let's see how many doors we can open, if we can open any of them. He said there would be 0. I said, well, there has to be at least 1. Ironically, the very first house he points this opener at and hits the button, the garage door goes up. And he was like, I goes, maybe that's a fluke because there's actually a guy standing in his garage, but the guy is looking up at his garage door. He was inside the garage, and he's looking up at his garage door. He's probably wondering why the darn thing suddenly went up. And then it's like, no, Dave, I actually think that was my code opening his door. So we started driving through, and this was a town of maybe 3,000-4,000 people. Darren, I'm not kidding you. In a half an hour's time, I opened up 5 garage doors, including that first one with my opener. And I went,
I believe it.
I don't think this is a good security device.
Well, no, and anybody that's familiar with the garage door opener, it'd be interesting to see the sequence of the pins in the garage door opener, because you set your pins, and I'm guessing just like people are terrible with passwords like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or password or whatever. I bet when they're setting those pins, they're just like pushing them all up, pushing them all in the middle, pushing them all down, because they don't think that somebody is going to compromise that. They're just making it easy on them, and they just set the pins to an easy sequence. And so I bet you that's what's going on is it's just us being lazy, and we're not putting in a sequence that increases the odds probably to infinity, where it's not going to ever hit. At least you driving down a street isn't going to randomly open 5 garage doors. And that's unbelievable. And that shows just how, you know, lazy people get with security, and they think it isn't going to happen to me. And that's the number one thing, is people don't do anything because they think that's going to happen to somebody else. When do you think most burglar systems or burglary alarm systems are sold? It's when the neighbors hit. It's when you're hit. It's when it's in the neighborhood. And alarm companies know that. And so what they do is they market neighborhoods. Hey, because they follow the crime blogs, right? There was a burglary 3 blocks over. Let's saturate this neighborhood with marketing and say, your neighbor was just burglarized. You could be next. Buy our alarm system. And so they do sell them somewhat on emotion and fear. And I have camera systems set up. I don't have an alarm system set up right now because my cameras take care of it. And they're set for remote. So I get a text alert if there's motion and all that. There's so many inexpensive things you can do if you don't want to get a full blown alarm system.
Sure.
Like the Nest Cam and the Ring cams and things like that are absolutely just phenomenal for getting video evidence and knowing what's going on. Because there's this thing, detect, deter, delay, right? So you detect somebody in your house, you try to delay them. If you can delay them for up to 4 minutes, usually they're not going to gain entry into your home. So detect, delay, deter, detect, and delay. So there's many things you can do that are really simple. They're really cheap. It's just we don't do them because we don't think it's going to happen to us. And then when it happens to us, we're like, whoa, what do we do? And so it's all about preventive things, like doing things to prevent everything that's going to happen. But you just got to first accept that it can happen to you, period.
Yeah, good stuff. So I know, being from the Minneapolis area, you mentioned that in the not distant future, you may be making a trip up there, training for local law enforcement like this. Because if in this given community where they've had 60 burglaries and not an arrest yet, does that suggest to you that? And I'm not saying that the police are underskilled or haven't been doing the right training, but does it suggest to you that something is maybe missing in the strategy of the police, that they've not picked up an arrest after 60 homes have been hit?
Well, growing up in Minnesota and then moving to Phoenix in 1991, and then having friends from Minnesota come to Phoenix and not locking their car, leaving their keys and ignitions at grocery stores, convenience markets. There's a culture thing going on here where we feel safe in the Midwest, and people kind of laugh, oh, we don't lock our doors. And so now you've had a group of burglars that suspicions are that they're coming from the downtown area, and they're going into suburbs and hitting the suburbs where historically this hasn't happened. As far as I know, I've never seen things lit up this bad with 60 homes being hit with the same MO. So this is all of a sudden a new thing for the Midwest where you felt safe at home. You didn't lock your door. You didn't lock your cars. And it's a cultural thing, right? And so now they're taking advantage of that. And so now people are like, oh my gosh, like now we're new targets, we're new victims. And that's what happens. So what was your initial question? I kind of went on a tangent, which I do.
Does it suggest to you the fact that this many burglaries have happened, does it suggest to you that something's missing either in the training or the strategies that the police are deploying here?
I'm guessing, being it's been going on for a month and a half and there's 60 burglaries, there's no arrests. I can tell you from experience, like our strategy of working career criminals, putting them under surveillance, we usually had our burglar in custody within 72 hours because they're that prolific. So they would commit a crime within 72 hours. And I've reached out to police departments up there. I just did it today because I'm traveling to the market or the area in the next couple of weeks. And I offered free training to these investigative agencies. I haven't heard back yet. I literally just sent out some emails and everything, but I'm guessing they're not using surveillance strategies that we utilized that were highly successful with a team of 8 in the Phoenix market on burglars or career criminals. I mean, we had sophisticated groups where we had up to 16 and 24 investigators and aircraft and GPS tracking and everything using or targeting these groups that were more sophisticated. But, and I don't want to say law enforcement, you're doing it wrong because they're probably not experienced with this type of phenomenon. Otherwise, it wouldn't be making such an uproar on Facebook with everybody, right? Like, oh, I can't believe it's happening. So they probably never utilized out of the box thinking like, hey, let's figure out, do we have possible suspects? If we do, let's mobilize and set up surveillance. Having said that, though, there's not a lot of surveillance training out there. And that's what I've been doing for a decade. Federal, state, local, private, corporate, retail investigators. I've been training. I've written books on it. I've written Terrorist Attacks, which talks about surveillance. So I've been teaching it for 10 years. And that's what I've offered some agencies in the Midwest is, hey, like, I'll come up there and do it for free, man. Like that. These are my friends and families that live in these neighborhoods. They're feeling somewhat terrorized and they're not feeling safe in their castles. I'll do whatever I can to help. And so I'm thinking surveillance isn't their core strategy. They may be doing, like one-off surveillances on possible leads. But like if it's a serious issue, you need to put serious resources behind it. Just as an example, this isn't a burglary. We targeted tons of burglars, like dozens and dozens, but we were involved in the AM rapist case in Arizona. It was a guy that targeted women. He had 16 victims, 16 female victims, and we targeted him with surveillance. We spent 3 months working surveillance in the areas that he was hitting. A surveillance team that was set up in an apartment complex that he decided to target that night. He literally parked next to a female investigator undercover. She watched him get out of the vehicle, go jump over a fence, and then all of a sudden 911 call came in. He jumped over the fence, ran to his car to leave, and he left, and they ended up arresting him. Surveillance is the only thing that caught him because this guy was smart. And so what I'm saying is surveillance is a tool that is entirely underutilized, sometimes because of a lack of resources, but usually it's because of a lack of training, of knowing how to do covert surveillance, because you just don't do it every day, day in and day out. And so when you do go out there, you're sloppy and you don't know what you're doing. So yeah, like this strategy that I did for almost a decade was highly successful. And that's why I teach it to other agencies.
Perfect. Well, great information as always, Darren, on how to deal with these burglaries. And for people that are in the rural communities, this leaving your doors unlocked, leaving things open, and just feeling secure, these kinds of things can happen to you too. So take that into consideration and use some of the advice that Darren just shared here. And we will pass this along to people in the Midwest, Darren, that you're available and interested in helping them with some training issues up there, because likewise, we have family there too, and we'd like to see this nonsense get stopped there in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. Kevin Hunter with Darren Fredrickson here on Master Surveillant Mindset on Northwest Division News. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.